We begin with Democrats scoring their biggest interview so far in this obstruction probe. Hope Hicks, the first Trump staffer to ever sit down with the Judiciary Committee since the Mueller report came out. Now, she sat for 7 hours, but both inside and outside the closed-door interview, she really wasn't saying much.
Hope, did the president obstruct justice? Is the White House letting you answer any questions today?
Have you spoken to the president at all about this testimony?
Why is the White House limiting your testimony so much?
No comment there from someone who, of course, was widely credited as a real messenger for the Trump campaign for a long time. Now, the White House says Hicks has, quote, absolute immunity from testifying, and Democrats say she just didn't answer most of the questions.
The witness has been directed by the White House and the president not to answer questions.
Almost every question I've observed, she is refusing, to answer.
Even something as simple as, where is your office located? Objection. It is ridiculous.
I'm joined now by NYU law professor Melissa Murray, who's also a clerk to Judge Sotomayor, and E.J. Dionne, columnist for the Washington Post. E.J., as a student of Washington, which is well known for some theater, what was accomplished today?
Well, not a whole lot. I mean, on the one hand, they did get a witness, but what you really saw was the length to which the Trump administration is willing to go to block any testimony before Congress. I mean, they'll make up any reason to say that somebody shouldn't testify. They might as well say they're exerting a privilege, which is they have the privilege to say that somebody can't say anything whenever they feel like it.
EJ,
and I think that,
EJ, is this like stacks on stacks? It's privilege on
I guess
privilege?
that sounds right. This is, I think this is a really awful precedent. You cannot imagine when there's a Democratic president again someday, Republicans ever accepting something like this. And obviously, this is getting in the way of the strategy that Nancy Pelosi has in mind. She, and at the moment, a majority of House members don't want to move quickly to impeachment. They'd like public hearings. This was a closed hearing. And they like people to come to testify. And the harder the Trump administration makes it for people to testify, the more it'll ratchet up pressure to move to an impeachment inquiry, which at the moment the House doesn't want.
Yeah, so let me ask you one more thing about that before I turn to the professor here. I wonder if what we're seeing today is potentially politically positive for the Republican White House in the short run and really substantively negative for all of America. Because you could argue that what you just saw was in their political interest, that their side says, great, Hope Hicks is defying, almost a little bit of like trolling, and the Dems are waiting around and complaining. And that's maybe a political benefit in the short. What is going to happen if the basic system that for hundreds of years has worked, partly, yes, with legal enforcement, but partly by tradition, where there is good faith oversight and testimony of the executive branch, if that is just going to be blown up over a thing that Donald Trump claims he's not afraid of, which is oversight and impeachment?
Right. Obviously, it is sort of beneficial to them, although I do wonder for people in the middle watching all of this, saying, gee, why don't they let anyone testify? But you put your finger on it when you use the word tradition. Until Trump came along, we didn't fully realize how much we count on norms, which are not written into law. They are things we just assume that people in power will live by because we're a democratic republic. And what it's going to do, for one thing, is force a Congress someday to codify a whole bunch of things we took for granted. But yes, this is very dangerous because you can't have a government with divided powers between the executive and the legislature without having accountability. And they're trying to block all accountability.
Professor Murray?
Well, I think EJ is exactly right. We have relied historically on a tradition of negotiation and accommodation between these two political branches, and what Trump is ultimately doing and requiring everyone to take what is known as absolute immunity, which actually doesn't exist in this particular circumstance, is to force this into the courts and to have a third.
Walk us through that as well. I mean, EJ was doing the Washington, you're doing the law. There is a thing called executive privilege. You're saying this absolute immunity is what?
So executive privilege, and the way the Trump White House is using it, is a species of executive executive privilege, this absolute immunity. But the whole idea here is that executive privilege is like a scalpel. It allows individuals who are close to the president, who are senior aides, to refuse to testify about certain episodes or conversations, all in the name of preserving the confidentiality of White House and the candor of White House communications. Absolute immunity, which is what Hope Hicks is asserting through her lawyer, is a blanket refusal to testify, and that's wholly different. So if executive privilege is a scalpel, absolute immunity is like a hammer saying we're going to shut all of this down. And that's something we haven't seen before. The only judge to have ruled on a question of absolute immunity and executive privilege was in 2008, Judge Bates from the D.C. District, who was doing this in the context of Harriet Miers and White House testimony with regard to the firing of the firing of U.S. attorneys, said that you couldn't have this and have a system of separated powers. It is absolutely antithetical to the idea of divided government to have the executive stonewall in this way.
Both of you stay with me. I want to bring in someone who actually knows Hope Hicks personally and worked with her for a time, former Trump campaign advisor Sam Nunberg. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
What do you think of the position Hope is in? How is she feeling today?
Well, I think she and the president are feeling that this is a win. The minute I saw that Jerry Nadler said that she's allowed to give closed-door testimony, they had the best of both worlds. Remember, there was press coverage about whether or not Hope would, quote-unquote, defy the White House, defy the president now that she's out. She agrees to show up. And at the end of the day, she doesn't answer any of the questions that she's quoted in the Mueller report. And at the same time, the president, to his base, is able to send out tweets trying to get out a narrative that will be covered on another network, that she is being exploited, she's being harassed, and this isn't fair to her.
And so do you think that this is the thing where, some people are out of the orbit and they're relatively independent or they move on? Other people, they're out of the Trump orbit and they seem just in lockstep. Your view, knowing the players here, is that Hope is 100% Team Trump right now, right?
Well, Hope is 100% Team Trump, yes. But then look at somebody like Don McGahn, doesn't personally like the president. Jones Day still is has a client in the Trump campaign. He's being called a liar by the president. He's being, constantly attacked. The president says he never personally liked him, yet he is also defying the subpoena and asserting executive privilege.
Does that surprise you?
Yes and no. What surprises me is that once again, the House Judiciary Committee has not come up with a strategy of really showing the American people what they're doing. Look, I don't work for them. It's not my job to do this. But I mean, the idea that you can have last week a cable news show, let's say, with, John Dean, and then when you have an actual witness who gave testimony that really goes to the heart of the obstruction issue, you have that behind closed doors. Why would you even agree to that?
So you're arguing, and I'll let the other panelists in, you're arguing that in a way you think, just in the pure theater of it, which is, as you know, what your old boss Donald Trump cares about, they got outworked because having Hope under oath in public, being that evasive, might have made them look bad. You're saying it was kind of a mulligan that she got to do it in private.
100%. And look, Trump said publicly, he said, I fought Jerry before, I'll beat him again. To use his words, he's laughing at Jerry, and he's making this very sad.
There's certainly a theater of the absurd quality to all of this. It would have been better to have Hope Hicks come before the committee and be questioned and stonewall. It would have been really evocative testimony for the American people to see. It would have underscored this view that the administration is hiding something and is not cooperating. But instead, you have this closed-door testimony. You have Nadler saying that she gave up some things that might be useful, but we really don't know, and we won't find out until 48 hours later when the transcript is released.
EJ?
Well, and I think the whole idea, I just want to underscore the point that all of you made, which I think is right. If you have the president's people objecting, even apparently to questions like, where is your office? This would not look good. And there'd be footage on the news tonight. And people would say, this really does look like a cover-up. They are obstructing. We saw none of that. I think they have to go back and say, if we do any more of this, we got to have public witnesses who either answer the questions or are seen as not answering them. And by the way, on privilege, it's one thing if you're president and I'm giving you advice on a war and we kick that around, some of that is legitimately privilege. You want honest advice. But they are demanding a kind of privilege that was just never conceived of. And yes, there were always negotiations between the executive and the legislature, but it just never never goes this far
yeah,
to
isn't
just
this-
a blanket wall.
We're sort of wrapping up where we started, but it's very important. Is this all it takes to beat the whole system? I mean, the Constitution lays this out. You know, you go to Washington, as you do, EJ, and you cover these stories, or Melissa and I spend time around law schools where they say, well, this is the whole thing. And I feel like it's the end of Star Wars here, where you have the Death Star, and it turns out, oh, there's just one little spot you can drive through, shoot one little pellet, the whole thing explodes. I mean, they just figured out that you just tell everyone to stonewall, nobody to talk, and eat up a year. I mean, is this the end of Star Wars, EJ, and then Melissa, and then we'll go?
There's a shot clock here. The shot clock is the election year. And so delay for the Trump White House is a great thing. They would love to push as much of this as they can in the election year and then say, see, they don't want the voters to make the choice themselves. So delay is their best option, and they're pursuing it.
Well, it's also important to remember here that executive privilege, qualified immunity, these are not specifically enumerated in the Constitution.
Right.
The Republicans like to go on and on about all of the things that are not in the Constitution. This is also not in the Constitution. So we really rely on norms, on customs to develop how we're actually going to recognize these kinds of privileges in order for separation of powers to work. And when you have something like this, where someone is not observing norms, not observing customs, you're going to kick this back to a court who's going to have to decide what the boundaries are. And that's where we're headed.
And who would have known that the White House counsel all this time was maybe Skywalker? You've seen Star Wars.
Yes, all of them.
But you're more of a WWE guy.
Well, I like Star Wars, though, too.
Okay. I'm glad we...
He's thinking Jabba the Hutt.
Who's Jabba, though? You don't want to pick anyone. No, you don't have to. I never want to set you up to say anything that could be misconstrued as rude. The Skywalker comparison being fundamentally positive, although, as I point out, you don't necessarily want to blow up a whole ship. A lot of people get hurt. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.